Welcome to the Online Strength Coach Podcast, episode 104. Louie Simmons talks weightlifting. Today's question comes from Jean Francis Anami from email. As usual, thanks a lot for the info you're putting out there. No problem, John. I'm glad some people are watching it. Stroke listening. You seem to have enjoyed the podcast between Travis Marsh and Louie Simmons. Could you give us the points you find interesting? I find Louie very difficult to follow. Too many Soviet studies, books, and lifter stories. I just thought it's not often, well, it wasn't often, you would hear Louie Simmons speak at length. He has a lot of written material out there. He has a lot of material in general out there. But I just thought it was quite good to hear him in an interview setting. I've tried to watch some interviews with Louie Simmons before and find them difficult to follow, but I think in a different context, as in the context of weightlifting with Travis Marsh, I actually found it easier to listen. To kind of preface this, I've read a lot of Louie's stuff, I've watched a lot of Louie's videos, and as such I have develop my own opinions on Louie Simmons and his style of training, which is very specific towards producing really good multiply powerlifters who compete in the federations that he lets them compete in. I just thought it was, he mentioned a lot of things that were good for debate, not necessarily things that you would definitely agree with or definitely disagree with. And as you mentioned, he does bring up a lot the old Soviet literature, or he'll bring up a lot of anecdotes about lifters. One of the most hilarious anecdotes that he brought up was obviously that Clarence Kennedy followed his West Side approach to lifting, which if you follow Clarence, you'll know is not the case. So I feel that there is that tendency for Louie to embellish a bit. I think if you listen to the man talk, you can probably pick that up fairly easily. But he talked about a few things that I thought were quite interesting. One of the things he talked about was spatial awareness or spatial methods. So basically referring to bands and chains and how they, in his opinion, overloaded the entire movement, so they allowed the lifter to utilize what he kept referring to as the optimal range for strength development, which is 75 to 85% of 1RM, but to utilize it in a manner that mimic more maximal muscular effort or mimic more an overload through the whole movement. So that's why he was saying for like strength cycles within a powerlifting context, within a box squat context, within a deadlift context, within a bench press, maybe less so bench press context, he favoured a lot more band tension versus weight. So he would say he might want maybe 50% band tension, 30% weight if he's going to make up 80% RM. I'm paraphrasing a bit, so I'm going to get quite a lot of things inaccurate. So that was one of the things I found quite interesting, was where the bands and chains come from. People assume that it's speed work per se, but when he talked about speed work, he was saying earlier on in his coaching career, he determined that powerlifters were slow and that they needed to be more dynamic. So he had them lifting between 75 to 85% with the idea that they would lift that weight more explosively or quicker. And he said they achieved that from working within those sets and reps, those intensities with the volumes of like 24, so 8 sets of 3. But then he was saying when they got up to 1RM level loads, it didn't make any difference to the lifters. They still needed to lift slower, they still needed to be able to produce that force over time to lift that weight. And from there, you can kind of garner where the West Side template comes from, or conjugate method that is so popular now amongst strength conditioning, powerlifting, and weightlifting, where that has come from. One, from his dynamic methods, obviously come from his volume-based work, so 8 sets of 3 at 24. That's where the dynamic effort has come from. It's always come from his volume work. But where his ME work or his maximal work comes from him obviously seeing that dynamic work or that volume work didn't necessarily manifest itself into 1 RM lifting. So for me, that was quite interesting to see where that had developed from, talking where certain elements of the West Side program had come from his own experience. Then a lot of things he was talking about within weightlifting, he was talking about the lack of assistance work within USA weightlifting, or I feel they always find it quite easy to poke a straw man. Certainly Louie is definitely guilty of poking a straw man. He was talking about within USA weightlifting that they didn't do any assistance work. All they concentrated on was technique and not on strength, and again, attacking strongmen. But in his opinion, they needed to do a lot more pulls, and he said the stronger that weightlifters got, and he was taking this from the manual on the development of weightlifters, where they got more bang for the buck, or where stronger weightlifters got stronger, was through a higher level of assistance work. So for a more advanced lifter, they might do upwards of 50% assistance work. So in the context of a weightlifter, assistance work becomes squats, presses, pulls, because this basically raises their ceiling within the context of weightlifting or maximal strength within weightlifting. And Louie then went further on down the road to say with his own lifters, they utilised 50% of assistance, and that's where you get a lot of the things with West Side. There's a hell of a lot of assistance work. You do repetition effort with different grips, different stances, different bars. They do a lot of lower level stuff like hypers, reverse hypers. They do a whole bunch of assistance work. And Travis Marsh, the guy he was talking to, he is a weightlifting coach. He was John North's coach for a bit. He's coached quite a few, or at least a few semi-elite to elite weightlifters. He was saying within his own training, that was something with primarily Travis, a powerlifter. He was saying within the own context of his own training, that was a huge breakthrough for him when training with Louie, was the amount of assistance work that he did helped him break barriers within the sport of powerlifting. So I thought that was quite an interesting take, something kind of get the pendulum within what's popular within online training or within people reading about online training. The pendulum's kind of shifting towards more of the skill-based work, or the 3 times a week squat, 3 times a week bench, 3 times a week deadlift, and away from where it was maybe in 2004 to maybe 2007, where it was very much on down the West Side line, where people were buying into the MED days. They were doing speed pulls, doing a hell of a lot of assistance, whereas with always, it's somewhere in the middle. He said something I also found quite interesting, quite amusing, with people who squatted more than twice a week. He's like saying you're squatting like Girl Scouts. You're basically referring to people who squatted 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week weren't squatting hard enough in those sessions, and that's why they could squat more. And obviously there's some merits to that. Training hard's not necessarily a bad thing. You can definitely make progress on 1 day a week, 2 days a week, but the difficult or the intensity at which you need to do that is, it's quite onerous on the lifter doing that kind of program. So I just thought there was quite a few different interesting little nuggets you could take out. Certainly things that you could have for discussion. It's not really something like that. I think that that little monologue probably covers the majority of what you might find interesting from the discussion. And with Louie, there's embellishment, or there's lifters, or he's talking about how his lifters are like the best squatters in the world, or they're squatting multiply in backyard federations with shit judging. I mean, everyone can see that. But he will still, this is the strongest squatter in the world. Well, under those circumstances, with the 50 people that compete in that federation, that, yeah, you're correct. Or how these guys have all-time records versus what? What I would like to see from powerlifting perspective, there's so many more lifters now, either in the American Raw, as it's called, which is the wraps only, or even just IPF. I know he's a big proponent of drug use, but there's no reason why he couldn't have a few natural lifters kind of go towards the IPF. I would like to see him put his chips down in that sense. I think he's a good trainer. I think he's got a lot to teach and a lot to show people, but I just think that would be a better acid test of his ability to produce more lifters in those kinds of federations. Probably something you'll never see, given his take on PEDs and his lifters. But IPF probably never let him put a lifter into their federation. But yeah, I just thought it was quite an interesting little discussion between Travis and Louie, and there's definitely food for thought. And I certainly think it's definitely true that you'll often learn a lot more listening to people who are of the opposite opinion of you, or who hold opposite beliefs from you. A lot of people end up, so for me, for instance, I could listen to Mike Israetel, or I could listen to Chad Wesley Smith, or I could listen to Mike Tushner and pick up like bits that are like, oh, that's a nice little snippet, that's a good snippet. Guys who maybe fall more in line with my training ethos or my training ideas. But I don't pay attention to people like that, because I don't really pick. I might pick a little bit up from them here, a little bit up from them there. We definitely pick stuff up from them. However, I'd rather listen to someone like Louie Simmons or go out the West Side and have my beliefs and have my ideas challenged. And maybe, because there's things we can all learn from Louie Simmons without question. Everyone could learn something from him. The guy's been coaching powerlifters for decades and producing world records in some manner. You know, he is the best at what he does, even if it is quite niche. Or he's certainly one of the best at what he does, even if it is quite niche. And everyone talks about the environment of Westside, and that's certainly something that a lot of gyms could learn from. That they seem to have that adversarial or that incredibly competitive nature about them. I can certainly learn a lot from a marketing standpoint from Louie. He made a hell of a name for himself, and making a very good living out of a little sweatbox gym in the west of America. So there's definitely things you can learn from him. I just thought it was really refreshing for me anyway, who someone's pretty much steeped within the world of performance sport or sports science, to listen to a meathead with completely opposite ideas, but who's obviously very well read and very opinionated. And I just thought it was really good from my perspective just to hear someone like that talk at depth for a few hours. So I thought it was a really worthwhile podcast to watch. I'll definitely be checking out some more Louie Simmons stuff going forward. Just kind of refresh myself more on his ideas, and there's certainly things that from his programming that I'll be experimenting with in line with some other ideas I've picked up from here and there. Because if you take the good stuff from the programs and take stuff that works and leave stuff that doesn't, and you become more effective year on year, either as a trainer or as a lifter or as an athlete. Okay, that's going to conclude this episode of the Online Strength Coach Podcast. Thanks very much for the great question. I'll answer the next one probably in the next few days. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Mark. If you want to catch me online, you can catch me at castironstrength.com or on onlinestrengthcoach.com. Catch me on Instagram, Online Strength Coach. If you want to send any inquiries, questions, anything that pops in your head, please shoot me an email, speedbarperformance@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Mark. I'll catch you in the next episode of the Online Strength Coach.